everybody? Welcome to the 4040 Vision podcast. I am your host, Khaled Abdallah, and I'm joined today by my fellow host, Salman Huck. What's going on, man? How are you?
Yo, what's going on, man?
Not much. I'm ready to dive in. So, today's episode is about the worst free agents of the last 5 years in the NFC. We're just about to kick off free agency in the NFL this year. So we wanted to take a look at some of the worst free agents from 2018 through 2023. So maybe a little more than 5 years. We cheated a little bit, but it's okay. So we'll start off with the NFC East. And just to remind you, this is other teams' free agents that the teams decide to bring in, or them re-signing or retaining their own free agent. So it could be a guy that they drafted late, paid for, a few years, really, really cheap deal, and then decided to reward him with a big contract that didn't quite work out. So keep that in mind as you listen to some of our picks. So Salman's going to pick one. I'm going to pick one. Sometimes we'll agree, sometimes we'll disagree. But we'll start off with the NFC East and the Dallas Cowboys. So over to you for your first pick.
All right. This one was kind of tough, but I went with Michael Gallup when they re-signed him in 2022. I think he signed a 5-year, $62.5 million contract. I think that's also the year they decided to trade Amari Cooper because his salary cap number was pretty high. And really, they were like, okay, Michael Gallup's just going to step right in here. CeeDee Lamb's our number one. Michael Gallup's going to be our number two. And Michael Gallup has not even been close to wide receiver 2 for the Cowboys. He had a lot of injury concerns before he signed this contract. He had some after this contract. And, I bet you can make a case that he might be a wide receiver 3, but not really. Like if you look at his numbers last year, he put up 34 receptions and 418 yards and 2 touchdowns. Hasn't finished playing a full season in I don't know in how long. So that's my pick here. That's why I'm give him kind of a somewhat big contract for a guy who can't even be a wide receiver 2, can't stay healthy, can't get on the field. So that was my pick. But there are plenty of options to choose from, especially in that 2020 class as well. And I think you're going to head that way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for Michael Gallup, he just, like you said, couldn't stay healthy. Had some production issues. I mean, last year, Brandon Cooks outshined him. He was basically their wide receiver 2. I had high hopes for him in that Dallas offense, but just hasn't worked out through injury and just, couldn't figure it out. My pick is a little bit further back. It's Dontari Poe. So they only gave him 2 years, $9 million, but $3.5 million of it was guaranteed. What was really bad about this is that he was expected to be a big part of Mike Nolan's defense. He was going to be, he was credited with 7 tackles and 1 pressure in 7 games and ended up being cut. So this guy that you signed to a 3-year deal doesn't even make it a full season. If you remember, Poe was a big part of the Kansas City defense for a while. He has that famous play where he threw a touchdown, I believe, which was pretty cool. But that's probably the most memorable moment of his career. But just a huge disappointment. I mean, they didn't spend too much on him. There was a couple other guys you could have picked from this 2020 class, but for him to not even make it through a full season, that's my pick for me. So next up, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say I could see that, and I think Gerald McCoy or someone they signed as well, right, in that same draft, in that same free agency class. So you could have gone with either of those guys. They both were terrible.
He's on my list a little bit later. But
okay, right, we'll
he bounced around a bit after leaving the Bucs and just never worked out anywhere. Next up, the Philadelphia Eagles. Who you got here?
Yeah, Philadelphia Eagles. I'm going with Malik Jackson. They signed him in 2019 to a 3-year, $30 million contract. I think he suffers his first game. He gets a foot injury, and then he doesn't actually never plays another down there in that season. The next year in 2020. For whatever reason, he only starts 6 games, doesn't put up great numbers, and then he's gone and he's released. So really, a year and a half, and he doesn't even play a year and a half. He plays 7 games for them and he gets released. Pretty big money contract. This was a guy who was supposed to come in and kind of be the anchor of the defense. I think he was on the Jaguars and Broncos previously. He had really good seasons there, but yeah, he doesn't really do much for the Eagles, and it was a big money contract for them that. For at least at that time for a defensive tackle, and it didn't work out.
and he was incredible. Well, you mentioned the Jaguars and the Broncos. He was a big part of that Broncos Super Bowl winning defense. Him and Von Miller were terrorizing quarterbacks. So you think this is going to be a natural fit. We're going to slide him right in. He'll fare in great next to Brandon Graham and Fletcher Cox and all these other guys and Chris Long. Obviously, doesn't work out, but I think this was definitely more injury related. Once he had that, I believe it was a Liz Frank injury, which is, if I'm not mistaken, like a small bone in your foot, something like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think the bigger the guy is, harder to recover from something like that. So
Yeah, exactly. And he was a big boy. So, yeah, that was my pick as well. I leaned a couple other directions, but the Eagles, I feel like after that dream team era they had, they don't really sign big time free agents. Like they trade, I mean AJ Brown they traded for a couple other guys, but they don't really sign big time free agents. They build through the draft and do their thing that way. So there wasn't too many guys to pick from, especially just in the last 5 years. So that's why I think we both ended up with Malik Jackson.
yep.
Next up, the New York Giants. Who you got?
I went here. I'll tell you, I initially was thinking Golden Tate, but then I was like, then I went further down, and then I also saw who you had picked, and I was like, oh yeah, Kenny Galladay. I forgot about that guy. Like that's how bad of a free
How
agent
could
signing
you
that
forget
was.
about?
I That's how bad it was. I forgot. I
Yeah,
didn't even want to
exactly.
remember that. Um, so yeah, Kenny Galladay signs in 2021, gets a 4-year, $72 million deal with the Giants. He plays 14 games in 2021. Only 37 catches for 521 yards, 0 touchdowns. 2022, he starts only 4 games, but plays in 12 and has only 6 catches for 81 yards and a touchdown. 2023, he's released. So easily, I think this might even be one of the worst free agent signings of all time. Like this would probably be mentioned in the top 10 of worst free agent signings of all time. But I don't know what happens. Kenny Galladay goes to the Giants, falls off a cliff there, and never quite is the same wide receiver.
Yeah, on Kenny Galladay, this is going to take us back a little bit, but it reminds me a lot of the Javon Walker deal that the Raiders gave or the Raiders made, in the early 2000s. But I think Javon Walker was hurt a lot. He had knee issues, stuff like that. So Kenny Galladay was not hurt. That was the weird thing is he was. I want to say he was great, borderline great in Detroit. Obviously, he was good enough to
Yeah.
earn that 4 year, $72 million deal, but yeah, he was great in Detroit. Maybe this is just a credit to Matt Stafford. I know he hasn't played with the best quarterbacks in New York, but I don't think that's an excuse to score one touchdown in 3 seasons, especially after getting a $72 million deal. I think it got to the point where he was a healthy scratch. He just couldn't get
Yeah.
separation
Yeah.
anymore. Yeah, like I don't. Was it just attitude? I mean, what did he just forget how to run
I
routes?
just
I don't know.
I don't know, man. It was bizarre. Like I think a lot of people drafted him in fantasy, like, oh, this guy's gonna kill it. He's been killing it the last few seasons on the Lions, and then like I think people were taking him in like the second round of fantasy drafts,
Hmm.
and they were disappointed. They're like, "What the hell? Like, what did I waste my pick on?" And I've never seen anything like this where a guy just goes to another team and like completely like is a shell of himself.
Hmm.
It's just amazing how bad he was on the Giants.
And yeah, and just not injury related is the big thing. He just completely
Exactly. Yeah, that's the other thing,
falls
right?
off.
Yeah, like falls off, no injuries. It's one of the most bizarre free agent signings I've ever seen.
Yeah, and if you couldn't tell, that was my pick as well. So next up, the Washington Commanders. Who you got here?
All right, the Washington Commanders. I went with Landon Collins. They signed him in 2019. They give him a big contract, 6 years, 84 million. He doesn't really have amazing stats. In his time with Washington, I know I think he tears his Achilles in mid 2020, and then in 2021 he comes back. Commanders try to make him like this hybrid linebacker safety, which seemed to work out a little bit better for him because he starts putting up better numbers. But then again, he gets injured again, hurts his foot. Overall, he wasn't super impactful for the team and not worth the money he signed for. And then they released him in 2021, so barely makes it through 2 seasons or 3 seasons with the team.
Mhm.
And yeah, and then he ends up back on the Giants where he came from. And when he was on the Giants, he was like I think he was like a Pro Bowl caliber safety, maybe even an All Pro. So a big drop off for him once he goes over to the Commanders. Some of it injury related, some of it just not producing.
Yeah, I mean, at the time, I thought it was a lot of money to give a guy like that. I mean, $85 million for a safety is pretty crazy money. Uh, but he was really good with the Giants. So was like, okay, it makes sense. You're paying a hefty price to get this guy that's a game changer. You're taking him away from a division rival, so that made sense as well. But obviously, the Giants knew something that the Commanders didn't, because he couldn't stay healthy there, and he had to get moved around. And I think he lost his explosiveness once he tore his Achilles. So just a bunch of reasons why he just couldn't come live up to that contract. My pick was William Jackson III. So he was a cornerback. They signed him in 2021. He was a former first round pick of the Cincinnati Bengals. Wasn't a great fit in the from the jump, but they just decided to splash a lot of cash, which is kind of what this team does. There's a lot of candidates for them over the years of overpaying guys and just them, completely underachieving. But they give him basically 3 years, $40 million. Couldn't stay healthy, didn't play well. He only played in 16 games over 2 years. They end up trading him to Pittsburgh in 2022 at the trade deadline, and doesn't really. I don't think he's played since then. So just a big bust among many others for the Washington Commanders. So
Yep.
next up, the NFC North. We'll start with the division winners, the Detroit Lions. Who do you got for the Detroit Lions?
Yeah, I thought this was a pretty easy one. Trey Flowers. They signed him in 2019. He signs this huge 5-year, $90 million deal with the Lions. I think clearly the Lions had to overpay a little bit to get some talent there, because if you look at Trey Flowers before he signs with the Lions, never had a double-digit sack season. He has a pretty decent year in 2019 with the Lions. He gets 7 sacks, 51 total tackles, 21 QB hits. For context, the number one player on that list has 37 that year. But over the next 2 years, he only plays 14 games, has 3.5 sacks, 46 tackles, 6 QB hits. Lions eventually just cut him after the 2021 season. They realized, hey, we clearly paid this guy. Probably wasn't worth all that money. Maybe if he gets a little, like, half the salary that he got here, maybe it's like a better signing. But to give a guy 90 million over 5 years, and for him to produce, like, never produce double digit sacks, and over like 2 years, like, have barely 3.5 sacks, that's
Mm-hmm.
pretty bad signing for the Lions.
Yeah, this was during the Matt Patricia era when they were
Mm-hmm.
signing anybody
All
they
the
could
Patriots.
from.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just like Josh McDaniels in Las Vegas, where he's signing Chandler Jones and Jacoby Myers, all these guys. Same exact thing. They paid Eric Flowers. Sorry, not Eric Flowers. What the hell is his name again?
Trey Flowers.
Trey
Trey Flowers.
Flowers. Eric Flowers is another guy that's on this list, not this list, but our AFC list,
Could be
which
on
is coming
another
up.
list. Yeah. Yep. Yep.
Yeah, he's another name on it. But yeah, just a massive overpay for a guy that overachieved in the Bill Belichick system, and obviously Matt Patricia couldn't get the same results out of him. I had a couple different choices here. I thought about going with Jesse James, the tight end, but I felt like for him it was kind of weird. They gave him $30 million, then they drafted T.J. Hawkinson in the first round. So I don't know if it's really his fault that he underperformed. I think they just kind of, maybe Hawkinson fell into their lap and they said, "Oh, wait, he's better than Jesse James." So I went with I'm not going to butcher his first name, but I'm going to call him Vaitai. He is an offensive tackle / guard from the Eagles. That's his last name, Vaitai. They signed him in 2020, gave him 5 years, 45 million with 20 million guaranteed, which is big money for an offensive lineman. He was okay the first 2 years, but he just hasn't really been healthy. Barely played this year. He only made 3 starts for them. And to make things worse, is he started at guard for them. And this is a guy that, you look at him and you think, oh, this guy's going to be a franchise left tackle or right tackle. And usually when guys don't hack it at tackle, they get moved inside. And that's exactly what happened to him. So I'm not sure what's going to happen with him. But yeah, he just did not live up to that contract. Next
Interesting.
up,
Yeah. I didn't
yeah,
even have him on my list, Colin. I didn't even look
you
at
didn't
him
think about
at
him?
all. I
Well,
didn't
there
even
you
think
go.
about him.
Next up, the Green Bay Packers, who do not sign free agents very often. So,
They do not.
but who
This
you
was
got?
a this was the Yeah, this was tough. So I actually went with the guy they end up re-signing, in Russell Douglas. They re-signed him in 2022. They signed him to a 3-year, $21 million extension. Uh, that's a pretty good 2020, decent 2022 season, and 5 interceptions, 13 passes defended. But for whatever reason, next year the Packers trade him for fifth round pick to the Bills. I think they were just like, oh, we got some better talent, and they just trade this guy after a year. So in my mind, that seemed like a pretty bad idea where you're signing this guy to a pretty decent money contract. He has a good season, solid season for you, but you just trade him to the Bills for a fifth round pick, just to get out of his cap number. So
Mhm.
that was my pick. Really hard to do this for the Packers because they do not sign a lot of free
Yeah,
agents, and that one
exactly. I
year where
was
they
gonna
did
say.
sign, those guys are actually pretty good. So um, it was really hard for the Packers.
Yeah, yeah. This is so I remember his story. I remember he was on the Raiders. I keep mentioning the Raiders, but yeah, he was on the Raiders in the offseason. He gets cut during preseason, training camp, whatever. He ends up on the Packers and he has an incredible season. I want to say
Yep,
this was the 2021 season,
yep,
right?
yep.
He balls out, plays really well. The Packers don't do that great, but he does really well for them. And, I'm kicking myself because we let go of a great cornerback. And then I don't want to say they overpay him, but maybe they get a little too excited about the job that he
Yep.
did. Like you said, he still does pretty good. I mean, 5 picks is that's good for a cornerback.
It's good. Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
which yeah, good. It's not great, but the fact that they traded him, like you said, for a fifth round pick is interesting. But again, it's the Packers, so we're kind of slim pickings here. Uh, but speaking of that, they made a pretty uncharacteristic move with my pick, and this was signing Jimmy Graham in 2018. They gave him 3 years, $30 million. So that's a lot of money for the Packers to spend on a free agent, which is something they just don't really do. Um, and he wasn't terrible. He was okay, but he only caught 5 touchdown passes in 2 years with the Packers. I think some of that had to do with Aaron Rodgers being in and out of the lineup. But when you pay a tight end, at least back then, 5 years ago, $10 million a year, you're expecting more than you know 5 touchdowns in 2 games or in 2 seasons. And then to make things worse is he ends up signing with the Bears in 2021 and catches 8 touchdowns. And he's still to this day, I don't know how many touchdowns he had this year, but he's like 40 years old and he's still a red zone target. So I think the Packers just misused him or something. But yeah, again, not many choices with the Packers. But do
Not
you
at
even
all.
remember? I actually forgot that he was on the Packers. I was like, I saw him like when
I
I was doing my
I
research. I was like,
remember I
when did
remember
that
they
happen?
did. Yeah, I do remember they brought him in because and I do remember that, but he just didn't make any memorable plays for the Packers. He was kind of washed up at that point for some reason. So, or at least that's what we thought. I guess it was the Packers just like maybe Aaron Rodgers just didn't gel with him and he didn't get the targets that he needed. But I do remember him
Yeah.
signing with the Packers and everyone being hyped for him, and then he just kind of
Mhm.
disappeared.
That's a different discussion, but you know what? I don't remember a single memorable tight end that played with Aaron Rodgers. Maybe he
Yeah,
just doesn't like
maybe Aaron
throwing at tight
Rodgers is
ends.
the tight end. Maybe he's just a tight end killer, man. Maybe that's what he is.
Yeah, he has a bunch of guys. Like I remember the other
I mean, the
Rodgers,
best
the
tight
tight
end
end.
was it? What about did he have Jermichael Finley or was Jermichael
He
Finley
did, but he
before his
kept
time?
getting hurt.
He
He
did.
had like a crazy
Yeah,
neck injury, a bunch of concussions. So maybe
yeah,
he's the
yeah.
only
But
one.
that might be the best tight end he played with.
I mean, he's had other guys, Robert Tanyan. I mean, he has like 100-year-old Mercedes Lewis. Like, oh, he's not
Lewis.
good, but
Yeah,
you know,
yeah. And Tanya
it's
was good
weird.
1 year, kind of. Yeah, it's weird. It's super weird that
I
Rodgers
mean,
doesn't have
every
a
other
good tight
great
end.
quarterback, you can kind of link him with a tight end. I mean, tight end might not have been
Mm-hmm.
their number one receiver, but you think about Manning and Dallas Clark, and obviously Brady and
Yep.
Gronk, Mahomes. It's
Mm-hmm.
just weird. Like,
Yeah,
where's your
yeah.
tight
It's
end?
just weird. Where's your tight? Where's the guy you rely on? Yeah.
Exactly. I guess it's just he likes throwing outside the numbers. Anyway, next up, the Chicago Bears. Who did you pick for the Chicago Bears? Because this was
I picked
very surprising to me that you picked this guy.
Really? Okay. All right. Well, I picked Robert Quinn. So they signed him in 2020. He signs a 5 year, $70 million with the Bears. He doesn't have a great 2020 season, actually. He only has 2 sacks. He bounces back in 2021 with 18 and a half sacks and is an all pro. But however, he gets traded after 2 seasons for a fourth round pick. So I, for me, it was just about only one good season out of a 5 year deal, and then you trade him for a fourth round pick, so not even playing out that full entire contract. And you give him pretty big money, a lot of money to come in and kind of turn this defense around, and he he does it 2021, but that's it, right? Like I think the rest of the years, you kind of just give up on him after that and trade him and get what you can for him. So it clearly they thought they made a mistake there and they traded him for whatever they could get.
The irony of you picking him is, so there was, a couple lists that I found. Maybe they're
Yeah.
not published in 2024, but they had him as their best free agent signing. So yeah, I was
It's
like,
probably
I mean,
published after 2020, after the 2021 season. I get it. After 2021,
probably,
he looked like a
yeah,
good signing, right? But then after that,
yeah.
he just crashes back down again. So I mean, one
I
good
just,
you
I
paying 70 mil
can't.
for one good year. I don't know about that.
No, you don't give him 70 million for one good year, and you're not happy with that. But I think what I am the reason why I can't have him as the worst is because he had that one incredible season. Like 18 and a half sacks, like I think the
Yeah,
record is 23.
it's incredible. Yeah, it's incredible. It's an incredible season. But what
Yeah,
about the
and I
season
want to
before that where
say
he signs that big money contract where he only
yeah.
gets 2 sacks, plays a full season too?
Yeah, and then I think he ends up on the Eagles, doesn't do anything there. We're all thinking, "Oh, he's
Yeah,
going to be part of the
yeah.
Super Bowl run, blah blah blah." Doesn't do shit for them that
Yep.
entire year. I think he just got old real quick.
He just got old and he got washed. Yeah, real quick. Yeah.
I mean, he was on the St. Louis Rams for I don't know, 4 or 5
Was
years,
he?
maybe more.
Oh
Yeah,
damn.
he's an
Yeah.
older guy. So,
He's old. He's an old guy.
yeah, these older pass rushers fall off real quick and then, they just kind
Hmm.
of bounce around for a while. Uh, I thought about him, but obviously I was like, no, because of the 18 and a half sacks.
Still put him
I
on there,
went,
college. I don't give a damn about one season.
I respect it, whatever. I went with Trey Burton. So some people probably don't remember that name, but he signed in 2018, shortly after throwing the touchdown in the Philly special. He's the guy that threw that touchdown. Uh,
Mm.
he had, he had career highs in Chicago that first year, but he had a groin injury the year after that, and he ended up being released into 2 years into a $32 million contract, and they replaced him with Jimmy Graham. So I kind of broke my own rule here with the one good season, but he didn't have a great season. So I think that's where the difference is. I mean, 18 and a half sacks, bro. That's
It's
crazy.
fine, man. You signed a 5-year contract. You better give me
Yeah.
18 and a half sacks every year then. If I'm giving you 70 mil, don't give me one season of 18 and a half. Got to give me more than
Yeah.
that. Consistency.
So yeah, Burton. I mean, him and Trubisky had a good connection, that first
I was
year.
hyped for
But
Burton. I was hyped for him to sign to the Bears. I was like, oh, sick. This guy's gonna be good on the Bears. And then he had that one good season. He just couldn't stay healthy enough to finish it out.
yeah, yeah. And the Bears usually have good tight ends, so yeah, he
Yep.
just couldn't stay healthy, and that was that. So next up, the Minnesota Vikings. Who you got for the Vikings?
For the Vikings here, I went with Zadarius Smith. He signs a 3-year, $42 million deal. Has a solid season with 10 sacks, but doesn't do much else outside of that. And then for whatever reason, the next year he gets traded for 2 5th-round picks to the Browns. So I just kind of look at things like that where I'm like, okay, you had an okay season, and then they just decided you were washed. It's like, why did you sign this guy for such big money if you thought he was going to be, if he's like, looks like he's washed to you after one season? I don't know that like a guy like this, they could have just done a 1-year deal, prove it kind of deal, and then seen from there. So for me, that's part of my decision. Where it's like you just traded him for 2 5th-round picks after he had a
Hmm.
pretty solid season with 10 sacks. So that's
I think
that's why
this
he makes the
is
list for me.
yeah, this is similar to the Landon Collins deal for me, where
Yep.
they're signing a guy from a division rival. He's on the Packers for a while. It's the same thing where you're like, okay, it's a double whammy. We get a productive player. We also take a productive player away from a division rival. And I think the decision to trade him probably had more to do with like Daniil Hunter showing out, and I forget the other pass rusher's name on the Vikings, but
Everson Griffin.
I want to say that's an old name. That's
That's the
way
old name.
older. Yeah.
That's the old name. Yeah.
uh,
Oh yeah, he
yeah,
went to the Cowboys. He went to the Cowboys.
he did. He did. I
He
mean, the
did.
Vikings in general, they're another team that does not usually sign big time free agents.
Yep.
That's their
Good
thing.
stuff.
Um, so this I had a hard time picking, but I went with Anthony Barr. So he's a guy that they actually drafted. He played really well for them early on, lived up to his high draft status, was a Pro Bowler like 3-4 years in a row. He ends up signing a 5-year, $67.5 million contract in 2019, but just couldn't stay healthy. He only plays 27 games over the next 3 years. played okay when he was fit or healthy, but he just kept running into injury problems. He ends up going to Dallas for a year. Now he's back in Minnesota, and he's basically a reserve linebacker for them. But just a huge overpay for a guy that deserved it at the time, but he just ends
Hmm.
up running into health problems and just couldn't stay healthy.
Yep. Yep. Health problems a big time concern for him.
All right, the NFC South is next. I had a lot of trouble with this team. They
I
also
did
don't
too.
sign.
They don't.
They do really
They
well
don't.
in free agency.
Yeah, they do really
So
well for sure.
the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Who you got here? Don't say
I
Tom
picked
Brady.
Russell. Tom Brady.
Yeah.
No. Russell Gage. I went Russell Gage here. They signed him in 2022. He signs a 3-year, $30 million contract. They guarantee him 20 million of that. Has 51 receptions for 426 yards, and then suffers a major injuries that keep him out for an entire season. He doesn't really do much for them. So I don't know. It was a weird signing at the time. Like, you're signing this guy who's like, I think at that time he was going to be their wide receiver 3 at best, maybe. Um, I don't know. He didn't do a lot, so it's a weird amount of money to give a wide receiver who's not even like a starting wide receiver for you. And then he kind of plays like that, right? He plays like a wide receiver 3, so it felt like an odd amount of money and an odd amount of guarantees to give a guy who doesn't really play that well and has been out for I don't think he's played in the last year and a half now.
I mean, I get the thinking, right? You're like, all right, we have Chris Godwin, we have Mike Evans. Let's get a really, really good slot receiver to take advantage of all the single coverage he's going to get and do all that. It just didn't work out because of injuries. I want to say he came from Atlanta, so it's another thing. Take division rival.
Division rival.
Maybe
Yeah.
that is the lesson here. If somebody plays really well for a division rival, you get to see him twice a year. Don't pay him
Don't pay him.
because
Exactly. Don't pay him.
yeah, because this other team obviously knows something that you don't. So don't pay him.
Yep.
Get a guy from
Yep.
another conference, another division at least. Uh,
100%.
Speaking of former Atlanta Falcons, I was gonna pick Russell Gage, but because it's the most obvious, but it just it's too easy. So
Too easy. All right.
I went with Julio Jones. They only paid him $6 million for a 1 year deal. I thought it was going to be fun. I was like, oh man, Julio with all these other guys. I think before the season, yeah, Russell Gage, Chris Scott. I was like, wow, Julio Jones is going to be their fourth wide receiver. Like, that's going to be amazing. Was not amazing. He only
And
caught
I think the
24
problem was
passes.
Julio.
Mhm.
He just got old. He just got old at this point.
Yeah, he was washed, and that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, they didn't pay him a lot of money, but he only caught 24 passes. They probably could have got better production from a younger guy, but I guess it was nice to have the name on the
Yep.
team. But yeah, again, the Bucks they do really well, so it was hard to pick
They
somebody.
do. It was.
All right, the New Orleans Saints. Who you got?
I went with Jameis Winston here. I know they signed him multiple times, but I will say once they signed him after the 2022 and 2022, uh, you know, he gets a 2-year, $28 million deal with the Saints. He's set to become their starting QB. Gets an injury early in the season, gets benched for Andy Dalton, and then never becomes the team starter again. He's eventually they trade for Derek Carr last year. Just Jameis Winston just never gets the shot at becoming the starter that the Saints wanted him to be. He has 1 year where he played really well for them, but he gets this decent amount of money here to be a backup quarterback, and so that was my pick. And again, the Saints are another team that they don't spend a lot in free. They haven't spent a lot in free agency the last 4 or 5 years, and when they do, they made some decent signings. So I thought this was another tough team as well.
I'm surprised you didn't say Derek Carr.
Out of respect for you, Khalid, I did not say Derek Carr. Well, maybe next year when we do this, Carr might be
Yeah,
on the
right.
list.
If they don't make the playoffs, yeah, I want to say he got hurt during that season. I
Yep.
think he tore his ACL. That's why he got benched. So not really his fault.
Yep.
But again, we're
Yep.
not making excuses. In injuries, in injury. Um, Another guy, just don't sign a division rival because he was on the Bucks
Exactly.
and he threw
Exactly.
30 touchdowns and 30 interceptions along with 5,000 yards. So the guy's the epitome of a gunslinger. Um,
Yep.
I
He would
went
have made
with
Brett Favre proud.
yeah, exactly right. I went with a tight end. So Cameron Meredith. This was in 2018. Makes sense if you don't remember the name, because he didn't do much in New Orleans. He had a big year with the Bears in 2016. That's why he got signed. he actually missed the 2017 season in Chicago because of a torn ACL and spent, most of the time in New Orleans on that, injury report or IR. So just a, guy that had potential, did well. Sorry, he's not a tight end. I'm sorry, he's a wide receiver.
Wide
My
receiver, yeah.
mistake.
No worries.
But yeah, he only caught 9 passes in New Orleans before he got released after one season. So maybe the lesson is don't sign a guy off for torn ACL. But I don't know.
Never sign a guy off a torn ACL. I think that should be a lesson to teams.
All right, next up, the Atlanta Falcons. Who you got?
All right. This one was pretty easy. Dante Fowler. They signed him in 2020. He signs a 3-year, $45 million deal with the Falcons. And he just gives them in 2 years with Atlanta. He gets 7.5 sacks. That's it. That's all he does for Atlanta. And then he resurfaces with the Cowboys in 2022, where he plays slightly better, but obviously gets a cheaper deal, all that stuff. But the money he signs with the Falcons is just insane. And only gives them 7.5 sacks over 2 years. So that was a pretty easy pick here.
Yeah, I went with the same guy. If this was about bad draft picks, and then we can have a much longer discussion about the Atlanta Falcons. But yeah, just another guy that I feel like sacks in general are kind of overrated. So if you see a guy that's he's a 5 sack guy, 6 sack, and then all of a sudden gets 10, 12, 13, you're like, all right, let me go back and look at some of these sacks because I think so much of getting the actual sack is luck versus
Mm-hmm.
how consistent are you with quarterback hits and pressures and all that other stuff and tackles for loss. I feel like one of the big, like, I don't know if it's a hot take or not, but I feel like a tackle for loss should be counted the same as a sack because essentially it's the same
Oh
thing.
yeah, 100%, 100%. I agree
Maybe
with
it's
you.
like because it's a sack, there's more potential for a big play that you're stopping. So people will say, a guy that had 10 sacks and 2 tackles for loss is better than a guy that had 10 tackles for loss and 5 sacks. So I think just sacks in general are an overrated stat, but whatever. That's not this conversation. So
That's a
yeah, we
conversation for another day.
for another pod. Next, the Carolina Panthers. Who'd you pick? I was surprised by your pick, to be honest.
Really? Okay. I went with Robbie Anderson. So he comes off a great. He was traded to them. He comes off a great 2020 season. And then signs a 2-year, 29.5 million extension. And I mean, he came off a great year in 2020. So I'm not knocking the 2020 trade. He has 95 catches for over 1,000 yards. Looks to be a wide receiver 1 or 2. But then in 2021, he doesn't put up great numbers. He has 53 receptions for 519 yards and 5 touchdowns. And then in 2022, he has some bizarre behavior. He gets kicked out of a game. And then within a few days later, he gets traded to the Cardinals. So within a year, he goes from this potential wide receiver 1 to bottom of the barrel on the Cardinals after some bizarre behavior. And that's why he was my pick. Like you signed him basically to be almost a wide receiver 1 on
Mhm.
your team, and he doesn't live up to that after he puts up a really good season.
Yeah. So he earned the contract, and
Yeah.
I think the only reason I wouldn't put him on this list or I didn't pick him, one thing is just to be different. We couldn't all have the same pick,
Yep.
just to make things more interesting. But I feel like his dip in play directly correlated with the dip in play of the quarterbacks in Carolina. I want to say he had his big year with Cam Newton, if I'm not mistaken, and
I
then
believe so.
yeah, and then they get Teddy Bridgewater, okay, Sam Darnold, meh, Baker Mayfield, not so good, at least in Carolina. So I mean,
Where's Robbie Anderson now? Where's Robbie Anderson now?
I don't even Arizona. I think
I don't think he's in the league. I think he's out of the
I
league.
think he was last on Arizona.
Yep.
I think this year he actually changed his name. His name is Chosen now, not
Oh
not
yeah,
Robbie.
sorry.
So
Robbie
maybe
Chosen.
he found God. So good for him. But yeah, I think it was kind of
He's on the
harsh.
Dolphins. He's on the
The
Dolphins.
Dolphins. There you go. So oh yeah, he was traded to the Cardinals and then bounced around. But yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
I think it was kind of harsh for him. So I had Gerald McCoy. So this is another guy we talked about him earlier. He bounced around a bit. He signed with the Cowboys after this. He signed with the Raiders. Didn't make it. I think he got suspended for PEDs before the end of the season, or before the end of training camp or preseason. Again, we just keep talking about the Raiders here, which is a common theme. That's probably why they've had so many struggles. They're tied to all these guys that are bad free agents. But another also division rival. Had a long career with the Bucks, played really well for them. He signs a 1-year, $10.25 million deal in 2019 with the Panthers. He has 5 sacks, which is pretty good for an interior defensive lineman, but doesn't live up to the big deal.
Yep.
But yeah, he's only there for a season before signing with the Dallas Cowboys, and also underachieving there.
Yep.
So next up, your boys, the San Francisco 49ers and the NFC West. Who you got here?
All right. I won't give away your pick, but I did like that. But it was when we were initially doing this, we were looking at 2019 and beyond, so I did not go there. I went with D Ford. Technically a trade, but he after he gets traded, he signs a 5-year, $87.5 million contract with the 49ers. He has an okay 2019 season. He has 6.5 sacks and 11 gains and 2 forced fumbles, but unfortunately, that's the kind of the beginning of the end for D Ford. We start seeing these ongoing neck and back issues. He also had him in Kansas City. Part of the reason why Kansas City was so happily willing to trade him for a second round pick. And yeah, that keeps him out the entire 2020 season. He plays only 5 games in 2021, and then he's released in July 2022. So the Niners, they kind of gambled on a guy who complemented their defensive line well, but just couldn't stay healthy enough to live up to that big money contract, and it's one of the few contracts that they've had where they didn't have a easy out as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so they got burned badly on this one, I feel.
Yeah, what Salman is referring to is I cheated. We were originally going to do 2019 to 2023, but there was too many. I ended up picking the same guys as you. I was like, all right, we need to expand this
Yeah,
the
that's
the
fair. That's
reach
fair.
a
Yeah.
little bit here. So we went back to 2018, and lo and behold, there was a lot of bad contracts in 2018. I don't know what was different about that year. Uh, if I'm not mistaken, so D Ford, to me, he's most known for ruining the Chiefs' chances of getting to an AFC Championship by being offsides
Yes.
against the New England Patriots, where Tom Brady throws
Yep.
what we thought was a game-ending interception against the Chiefs in the
Yep.
AFC Championship. Did he also have a high-profile penalty for the 49ers in the Super Bowl? I see you're thinking, you're kind of looking up at the sky. Forgive me if I'm wrong.
I bel
For some
No,
reason,
I
I
think he
remember
did.
this.
I think he did. I think he did. It wasn't as egregious as the one he did with the Chiefs, but
Uh-huh.
he did have another penalty where I think he was offsides, and it was like
I
the
think it
Chiefs would have
wiped
got
away a
the,
penalty or wiped away an interception or something in
was
the
it an
Super Bowl.
interception? Oh man.
I'm gonna have to look
I
this
try not
up.
to
Let's fact
I
check
try not
this.
to recall I try not to recall the Super Bowl losses, call it. So
Yeah, that's
they kind
why
of
I
been wiped
didn't.
out of my memory. I
That's one of the
I don't
reasons I
remember it
did
being that.
the.
I think you're right. I think
Uh-huh.
you are right. It was a yes, you're right. It was a offsides that took away an interception. And then
Okay.
it's crazy because I think the next play later they get a pass interference call in the end zone after that. So that I think you're right. What I remember more was that pass interference in the end zone. I don't remember
Hmm.
this D Ford one, but I think you are right. He does jump off sides and take away an interception again for the Niners.
Okay. I'm gonna look
But it,
this up to verify,
you
but
fact check that.
I
Yeah,
trust
fact
you.
check
I'll
it.
fact check that. But yeah, that's why I didn't ask you to do the Super Bowl Legacy Pod with me, because I knew
I wouldn't have done it, man. I wouldn't have done it. I was like, no, thank you, Colin. No, thank you.
we had a lot of content lined up if the Niners won with you and Osama, but it didn't work out that way, so I had to fly solo on that pod. But it was a good time.
Yep.
Um, Poor D Ford. Anyway,
Yeah.
so Saman alluded to the guy that I picked, and that is Jerick McKinnon. So they had big plans for him. I thought, looking back at it now, you're like, this was the guy this is the reason why they traded for Christian McCaffrey. They had a very similar game plan in mind. They were going to use McKinnon just like they're using McCaffrey as this versatile weapon who's going to catch passes out of the backfield, line up in the slot, all that stuff. They gave him 4-year, $30 million deal in 2018, but basically a torn ACL and a bunch of setbacks cost him the entire 2018 and 2019 seasons. He finally gets on the field in 2020, but he ends up in 3 years with 500 yards or 570 yards from scrimmage and 6 touchdowns. So if this is a guy that you sign off the street, Sure, that's great. But if you're giving a guy $30 million, you want a lot more than 6 touchdowns. So um, I don't
Absolutely.
think
Yeah.
he's in the league anymore. Oh no, I'm sorry. He's on Kansas City.
He is. He's
Yeah,
on the Chiefs. He's on the Chiefs.
yeah,
Just still doing
and
Jarek
he's been
McKinnon
healthy.
thing, sticking around. Yeah. Still
Yeah.
sticking around somehow. Back to that D4 thing. He did
Yes,
not line
please.
up offsides and he did not cost him an interception. He did line up offsides, but it didn't cost him anything. It was like
Okay.
they they were driving down the field. It was like a 1st and 10, and he lines up in the neutral zone. But that's it.
Okay. All right. You have to check that one.
I'm gonna clear his name. I'm gonna clear his name. I'm gonna clear his name. I there was yeah. You had me kind of thinking, is that what happened? And I'm kind of going back long time ago, but I thought that happened, and then nope.
Okay.
I went back and I just checked it for you. I fact checked it for you. Yeah, I cleared
Maybe it
D4's
was
name.
against the Rams. I don't know. I'm gonna go back and
Maybe.
look
All right,
this up.
you go find it. You go find it,
I'm gonna
Khalid. But it was
find
not
it.
in the
I'll
Super Bowl
text you after.
for
All
sure.
right. Speaking of the Rams, they are next. So who you got?
Pretty easy one. Allen Robinson signs a big money contract here, 3 years, 46.5 million. Didn't make sense to me at the time. Like he was kind of washed up already when he's getting to the Rams. Barely last a year there, and I think he gets traded to Pittsburgh, and he catches 33 passes for like less than 350 yards and 3 touchdowns, and so that was my pick to give this guy a bunch of money. Can't even be a good wide receiver too for you.
Dude, I thought this was gonna be incredible. I was
That's what
like,
I thought he was flamed out at this point. So I was a big Allen Robinson fan when he signed with the Bears. I was like, oh, dude, the Niners made a mistake. They should have gone after this guy. Should have done it. Obviously, he has injury concerns with the Bears, but
mhm.
at that point, I'm like, man, you can't trust Allen Robinson to stay healthy. You can't give him a big money contract.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be, like I said, I thought it was going to be incredible. I thought he was going to be a volume target, basically like Puka Nakua this year. I was like, oh, that's going to be that's what I had in mind for Allen Robinson, like next to Cooper Cup. And if I'm not mistaken, this is also the same year that Matt Stafford got hurt, and they ended up with like a quarterback carousel. And the Rams just were not very good in general. So, you know, I think it's just
Yep.
it's a combination of his own washed upness and just a lack of quarterback play. Like maybe if he's playing with a better quarterback now, like even this year, he's on Pittsburgh and he's playing with Kenny Pickett and Mitch Trubisky. So he just keeps finding himself. I mean, the poor guy got drafted by the Jaguars and he's catching passes from uh, Blake
Yep.
Bortles, and then he ends up in Chicago. I don't even know who his quarter. Mike Glennon. Like he just,
And
sometimes these guys.
Mitch Trubisky.
And Mitch Trubisky. That's right. I think sometimes these guys, man, they just because he was 1,000 yard guy in
He
Jacksonville,
was.
and I was like, this guy's incredible. Just wait till. I remember seeing a graphic on Twitter after his signing with the Rams. Are like, Matt Stafford is the best quarterback he's ever played with by like a country mile, and they
Yep.
listed all the guys that he's caught passes from, and I was like, this is the worst quarterback list I've ever seen. But yeah, my pick as well. No big surprise there. Next up, the Seattle Seahawks. Who you got here?
This one was a little difficult. I went with Will Disley. They signed him to a 3-year, $24 million contract in 2022. Thought it was a bit high of a deal for a tight end who's coming off 2 major injuries. Um, but I guess they want to take care of their guy. So in 2022, he has 34 catches for 349 yards and 3 touchdowns in 15 games, and then in 2023 he has 17 catches for 172 yards and 1 touchdown in 14 games. So he's really just a backup tight end, and you're paying this guy $8 million a year. So I thought that was, I don't know, a little egregious for a backup tight end, and that's my pick. But again, Seattle's a really tough one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, another team that just drafts and trades guys. I mean, if we're talking about trades, you would just put Jamal Adams. Maybe we should do a trade spot, like worst,
Yeah,
you know,
worst trades of all time. Yeah, I'm
not of
down with
all
that.
time, but yeah, the worst
I mean,
trades.
we'll give ourselves more room. We'll give ourselves like 10 years or something like that.
Yeah, it's basically Russell Wilson, uh, Jamal Adams.
Adams. Yeah,
I don't know
there
who
there could
else,
be
but
quite a few. There'd be quite a few.
quite a
There could be
few.
quite a
Yeah.
few.
Yeah, so this was tough. I went with BJ Finney. So they signed him in 2020. He's a center. Signed him in 2020 to a 2-year, $8 million deal. So nothing crazy, but this was in the COVID off season, and apparently that restricted them from like giving him a physical because they didn't
Mm-hmm.
allow in-person contact. So he
Yeah,
basically
I read
was,
about this. I read about this.
yeah, he came into the camp. He came into camp not being in shape, so he didn't want, because he didn't want to get hurt, which makes sense, right? If you get hurt
Yeah,
during a team
yeah,
activity, then I think your signing bonus, all that stuff is still safe. But if you get hurt off the facility doing a non-team workout, then that's, because the NFL is
yep,
shady. They'll be like, you were lifting weights in your own backyard. We're not going to pay you for that. So
yeah.
anyway,
Ridiculous.
he lasts only 6 games with the Seattle Seahawks, does not play a single snap on offense, and he makes $3 million. So good for him. Not so good for the Seahawks.
Hey, gets paid.
Yeah, man. COVID, man. There's another guy in the AFC side of things. His COVID just threw everything off for him. Uh,
Yeah.
but anyway, last and least, the Arizona Cardinals. Who you got?
I went with Zach Ertz. They signed him in 2022 to a 3-year, $31.65 million contract. Has a decent season in 2022, but has a season-ending injury in Week 10. His numbers in 2022 before the injury are 47 catches, 406 yards, 4 touchdowns. 2023, again, plays only 7 games, goes on IR with a quad injury, and then he's asking for his release. Overall, they paid quite a bit of money for a injury prone older tight end who they basically released after 1 year, and who's like, I think he ended up on the Lions practice squad after this, so he doesn't even go to a team where he can make a difference. But yeah, he's just old. He's just injury prone. Not sure what the rationale was. I mean, I guess he was coming off a pretty solid season when they traded for him, but to sign him to a 3-year, $31 million contract didn't make sense.
Mm-hmm. He was elite in Philly. He was a
Was
1,000 yard
was
tight end.
was
Was, yeah, yeah. So I get the logic. It makes sense. You're like, all right, we're gonna get this tight end. We're gonna give our young quarterback a safety net or safety blanket. Um, like I said, he has a decent season. After the trade, he does okay in Philly. I want to say, sorry, in Arizona. So not this year, but I want to say last year he was having a really good season in 2022 before getting hurt. You talked about he had a season-ending injury after 10 games. I don't want to keep relying on fantasy stats, but I just remember him being a reliable fantasy tight end in 2022 before falling off completely and having that season-ending injury. So yeah, I mean it makes sense. It's a lot of money to pay a guy that doesn't give you much, but yeah, unfortunately it's mostly injury related. Um,
Yep.
this is another one where I broke the rules because I didn't want to pick Zach Ertz, pick the same guy as you. That's another reason why we expanded it out to 2018. And this guy was Sam Bradford. People call him the finesse god because he just keeps getting paid or kept getting paid by teams to not play. He's drafted
Not
by the
play.
Rams. He gets traded to Philadelphia for a first round pick. He gets traded to Minnesota for another first round pick, I want to say. Gets and then ends up on the Cardinals.
And he was the number one pick too, right?
He was
That year.
yeah, I want to say he was the number one pick. I mean, he was great in college, so I get it.
He was great in
Uh,
college. And I think he's the last rookie quarterback to get paid before they do the rookie like salary cap.
Bro, you read my mind. I was literally about to say that. He got a crazy contract, like you said, before they
Insane.
implemented the rookie wage scale. So he got funny money from the Rams. And he was one of those guys where I remember every time he played, they would show his completion percentage, and it was split like, oh man, he has 72% completion percentage. He's incredibly accurate. And then you watch him and he's just throwing like dump offs and 5 yard outs and 3 yard curl and when it's 3rd and 15, and you're like, well, he's completing 75% of his passes. But anyway, for the Cardinals, they sign him. They give him $15 million to be their bridge quarterback, before they traded up to draft Josh Rosen, which was another disaster in itself. Bradford starts 3 games for them. He ends up being basically inactive after that and was released in November. So they gave him $15 million guaranteed to spend, I don't know, 2 months with them. So again, he just finessed the Cardinals. He didn't have to work the rest of the season. So good for him. Not so good for the Cardinals. But do you remember the Sam Bradford era in Arizona? I'm sure you do. You probably enjoyed it a lot.
I yeah, yeah, I did. Absolutely. I'm like, fantastic. I'm just glad they tanked so hard that they got number one and took decided well, I was hoping we'd get number one. The Niners would. But then when it was clear they were gonna take Kyler Murray, I was like, thank God, thank God. I didn't enjoy it as much because I wanted to win like one more game so we
Mhm.
could get the number one and take Bosa, but we still got Bosa, so it worked out.
I remember that year the Raiders went into, again, I keep talking about the Raiders, my mistake or my fault, but you see the hat.
I mean, you got the Raiders hat.
I remember they went into Arizona, and Derek Carr was throwing touchdown passes to Marcel Aitman and a bunch of guys off the practice squad, and they beat the Arizona Cardinals. When if they lost that game, I know they lost to the Niners that year, but if they had lost that
Oh,
game to Arizona,
they would have had the number two, right?
would have had
Something
the
like
number
that.
2 pick. Would have picked
Yep.
Nick
Could have.
Bosa instead
Oh,
of Cleveland
that's a
Farrell.
that yeah. There you go. There you go. Because the Raiders have the fourth pick in that draft, right?
I want to say they had the
Yeah.
third pick or the fourth.
No,
Was it?
I thought the Jets had third.
And they picked
Was it the
Sam
Jets?
Darnold.
Quinnen Williams?
No, they
Quinnen
picked
Williams.
Sam Darnold.
No, Darnold was before. Darnold was before.
No.
I'm ninety
Oh yeah, he
percent
was in the
certain
Rosen draft.
it was yeah. I'm pretty certain it was Kyler Murray, Nick Bosa, Quinnen Williams. That's the top three in that draft.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, they could have been number 3 and drafted Quinn Williams instead of Cleveland
There you go.
Farrell, which would have worked out a lot better. And I'm kind of dealing with that now as they won a bunch of games to end the season, and now they're 13th when they need a franchise quarterback. So again, topic for another podcast. But
Absolutely.
I think the lessons from this podcast is don't sign a division rivals player for a ton of money because they know him better than you do. And what else? Don't sign a guy coming off a major injury.
Yeah, don't sign guys
So
coming off major injuries for sure. And never sign Kenny Galladay.
yeah, exactly. So word to the wise for people looking at Kirk Cousins and trying to give him $50 million a year, which is apparently the rumor. But yeah, this was fun.
Don't do it. Don't do it.
Don't do it. Don't do it. We'll do the AFC next. So we'll stay tuned for that. We'll have that out, the following week after this one comes out. But I appreciate your time, man. Thanks so much.
Peace.